Everyone told him to stop feeding the vicious stray cat. But when he followed her cries on a rainy night, everything changed. Why does a lonely man keep feeding a stray orange cat that viciously attacks only him? Neighbors call her a menace, but the shocking twist lies in a forgotten accident and a rainy night discovery that reveals the heartbreaking truth behind her targeted aggression, ultimately transforming sworn enemies into soulmates. Subscribe, like, and listen to this powerful story of guilt, forgiveness, and unexpected connection. David Miller suspected the stray orange cat hated him specifically. It wasn't just the general wariness most feral cats displayed towards humans. This was personal. Every evening, like clockwork, when David stepped onto his back porch to leave a scoop of dry kibble near the overgrown azalea bushes bordering his small yard, the cat would materialize from the deepening shadows. And every evening, the reaction was the same. A low, guttural growl rumbling from its chest, ears flattened against its skull, green eyes narrowed into hostile slits. If he lingered too long or made the mistake of trying to speak softly to it, the growl often escalated into a hiss, sometimes followed by a lightning-fast, claws-extended swat if he dared get within a few feet. Yet, paradoxically, the cat always ate the food. David would retreat back inside his lonely, too-quiet house, the house that felt hollowed out since the divorce 2 years ago, and watch from the kitchen window. After a few minutes of cautious surveillance, the orange cat would dart forward, grab mouthfuls of kibble, retreat to the shadows to eat, and repeat until the small pile was gone. It accepted his offering, but rejected his presence utterly. He didn't know where it came from. It had appeared in the neighborhood on Sparrow Street about 6 months after his wife Karen had moved out. A lean, tough-looking ginger tabby with a torn ear and an attitude that broadcasted, "Stay away." Most neighbors gave it a wide berth. Mrs. Henderson next door called it "that menace," convinced it was responsible for digging in her flower beds, though David suspected raccoons. Young Timmy Carlson from across the street had apparently gotten too close once and received a memorable scratch for his trouble. "Vicious thing," his mother had declared loudly enough for David to overhear. "Someone ought to call animal control." David hadn't called animal control. Despite the scratches he occasionally received on his hands when placing the food bowl down, despite the daily display of feline animosity, he persisted. Every single evening, the food appeared. Why? He wasn't entirely sure himself. Partly, it was loneliness. At 52, working a solitary job as a technical writer from home, his days were marked by silence and routine. The brief, tense interaction with the fiery orange cat was, however negative, a connection. Partly, it was empathy. He saw a fellow solitary creature navigating a harsh world, surviving on scraps and suspicion. He understood, perhaps too well, what it felt like to be defensive, to keep others at arm's length, and partly, buried beneath the surface, there was a nagging, persistent flicker of something else. Guilt? He couldn't quite place it. He had a vague, unsettling memory, fuzzy around the edges, from months ago, shortly after the cat first appeared. He'd been rushing out late one morning, preoccupied with a looming deadline, or maybe still reeling from a difficult phone call with Karen. He remembered turning the corner of his driveway too quickly, a blur of orange, a startled yowl, the sickening feeling of impact. Not hard, not like hitting something solid, but a definite bump. He'd stopped, seen the cat scrambling away, maybe favoring a leg slightly. He'd felt a pang of remorse, but had been too consumed by his own turmoil to investigate further. He'd mostly pushed the memory away. But sometimes, watching the cat's fierce green eyes glare at him, he wondered, could that brief, careless moment be the root of this targeted hostility? It seemed unlikely a cat would hold such a specific grudge yet. So he continued, placing the food, enduring the growls and hisses, retreating to watch the wary consumption from his window. It was an uneasy truce, a ritual of offering and rejection played out against the backdrop of his quiet suburban street. The neighbors thought he was foolish, perhaps even courting danger by encouraging the vicious stray. But David felt bound to this small, fierce creature by threads of loneliness, empathy, and that persistent, unsettling whisper of guilt he couldn't quite ignore. He just wished, sometimes, the cat didn't seem to despise him quite so thoroughly. The seasons turned, bleeding from the hazy heat of late summer into the crisp chill of autumn, then the damp gray of early winter. David's life maintained its steady, quiet rhythm. Work, solitary meals, long evenings spent reading or watching old movies, occasional awkward phone calls with his grown daughter who lived on the West Coast. The sharp edges of the divorce had softened into a dull ache of loneliness, a constant companion in the house that still echoed with Karen's absence. His one unwavering daily ritual remained the feeding of the orange cat. He'd taken to calling her Spitfire in his head, a name that seemed to fit her explosive defensiveness towards him. Rain or shine, frost or mild evening, the bowl of kibble appeared by the azaleas, and Spitfire always appeared to meet it, her hostility towards him seemingly as constant as his provision. He tried varying the food, adding canned tuna once, which she devoured with even greater speed after he retreated, but it earned him no lessening of the growls or flattened ears. The memory of that morning collision solidified in his mind over the months. It wasn't just a vague impression anymore. He could clearly recall the jolt, the orange blur, the cat's cry of pain and fear as it darted away, definitely favoring its right hind leg for a few steps before vanishing into the Hendersons' prize-winning hedge. He remembered feeling a knot of guilt tighten in his stomach, quickly suppressed by the urgency of whatever had been consuming him that day. Now, the memory played back with uncomfortable clarity whenever Spitfire launched into her defensive display. He started watching her more closely when she came to eat, trying to observe her movements from his kitchen window. Was there a limp? It was hard to tell. She moved quickly, cautiously, always poised for flight. Sometimes, perhaps, he thought he detected a slight stiffness in her right rear leg, a subtle hesitation before she put weight on it. Or was he imagining it, projecting his guilt onto her? He couldn't be sure. His feelings about the cat became increasingly complex. The frustration at her persistent aggression warred with his deepening guilt and a growing admiration for her sheer tenacity. She was a survivor, thin, yes, scarred definitely, but fierce and determined. She faced the world head-on, trusting no one, relying only on herself, except for the food. The food he provided, that was the paradox. She clearly associated him with danger, with the pain of that long-ago collision, yet she relied on his daily offering for sustenance. Did she understand the connection? Or was hunger simply a stronger drive than fear? Mrs. Henderson sometimes stopped him when he was retrieving his mail. "David, you're still feeding that awful cat. It tore up my petunias again last week." "I don't think she did, Martha," David would reply quietly. "Probably raccoons." Well, you shouldn't encourage it. It's feral, might have diseases, and it's certainly got a temper." David would just nod non-committally. He couldn't explain his actions, not really. How could he articulate this strange sense of responsibility, this connection forged through hostility and guilt? How could he admit he felt a kinship with this fierce, solitary creature fighting its own battles on the fringes? His own life felt like a kind of cautious survival, navigating the quiet landscape of post-divorce loneliness, keeping his own defenses up. Maybe feeding Spitfire was his way of offering solace to a fellow traveler on a difficult road, even if that solace was met with suspicion and anger. He bought a better quality cat food, one formulated for sensitive systems, hoping it might help whatever unseen struggles she faced. He made sure her water bowl, tucked under the porch overhang, was always clean and full, especially during the dry spells of late summer. He never tried to approach her directly anymore, respecting the invisible boundary her growls enforced. He simply provided. It became less about seeking connection and more about fulfilling a duty, easing his own conscience and offering a silent apology for a moment of carelessness months ago. He accepted the scratches on his hands as a kind of penance. The ritual continued, an unshakable habit born of guilt and empathy, a silent conversation conducted across a gulf of misunderstanding and fear. Winter arrived in earnest, bringing biting winds and days of cold, driving rain that turned David's backyard into a sodden patch of mud and dormant perennials. The ritual, however, remained unchanged. Each evening, bundled in a waterproof jacket, David would step out onto the covered back porch, measure out the scoop of kibble, and place it in the heavy ceramic bowl near the azaleas, now bare and skeletal. Spitfire's appearances became briefer in the harsh weather. She'd dart out from whatever shelter she'd found, eat quickly, and vanish again, her orange fur dark and slick with rain. But she always came, and she always greeted David with the same low growl. One particularly miserable Tuesday evening, the rain was coming down in near horizontal sheets, driven by a gusty wind that rattled the windows. Daylight faded early under the heavy gray sky. David hesitated, peering out at the deluge. Even Spitfire might stay hidden tonight, he thought. Still, habit and that persistent sense of obligation propelled him. He pulled on his boots and jacket, grabbed the food container, and opened the back door. The wind immediately snatched at the door, and rain lashed onto the porch floor. He quickly placed the food bowl in its usual spot, though it was partially exposed to the driving rain. As he straightened up, ready to retreat into the dry warmth of the house, he heard it, the familiar, guttural growl, but it sounded different, muffled somehow, and not coming from the usual direction near the azaleas. It seemed to be originating from further back, near the corner of the house where he kept his recycling bins tucked away under the slight overhang of the roof. He paused, listening intently over the drumming of the rain. There it was again, a low, continuous rumble, less overtly aggressive than usual, more protective, or maybe distressed. He couldn't quite tell. Curiosity piqued, he pulled the hood of his jacket further over his head and stepped off the porch, walking cautiously towards the recycling bins. The area was dimly lit by the light spilling from his kitchen window. As he got closer, he could see her, Spitfire. She was huddled low to the ground, partially sheltered by the large green recycling bin, her fur plastered flat by the dampness. And she was definitely growling, her gaze fixed not on David, but on something beside her, on the ground. David stopped, keeping a respectful distance. He expected her to turn her hostility towards him as soon as she noticed his approach, but she didn't. Her attention remained locked on the object beside her, her body tense, shielding it from the wind and rain. What was it? Slowly, heart pounding slightly, David took another step closer. He could now see what she was guarding so intently. It was a shallow cardboard box, soggy and misshapen from the rain. It looked like the kind disposable baking pans came in, and nestled inside, on a few scraps of dry leaves the mother cat must have gathered, was a tiny, shivering kitten. It was incredibly small, its fur a pale, diluted orange, its eyes barely opened slits. It looked impossibly fragile against the harshness of the evening. Spitfire lowered her head and nudged the kitten gently with her nose, the growl softening for a moment into a low, rumbling purr before resuming its defensive tone, directed now seemingly at the storm itself, at the whole wet, miserable world. David stood frozen, rain dripping from his hood, comprehension dawning with the force of a physical blow. Spitfire wasn't just a solitary stray fighting for her own survival anymore. She was a mother, fiercely protecting her single, vulnerable offspring. And the growl he had heard, wasn't for him. It was a warning to the elements, a declaration of defense over the only precious thing she had. In that instant, everything clicked into place with painful clarity. The memory of the collision months ago, her persistent targeted aggression towards him, the source of that past pain and fear, her reliance on the food he provided even while despising his presence, her lean toughness, her survival instinct now channeled entirely into protecting this tiny life. His guilt surged, sharp and profound. Her defensiveness wasn't arbitrary or vicious. It was earned, a direct result of his carelessness. And yet, ironically, his persistent feeding, born from that same guilt, might have been what gave her the strength to carry and deliver this kitten. He looked at the mother cat, huddled protectively over her baby in the inadequate, soggy box, growling defiance at the storm, and his frustration melted away, replaced by overwhelming empathy and a deep, aching respect. He finally understood. The understanding that washed over David in the cold rain was profound. Spitfire's aggression wasn't malice, it was memory, fear, and now fierce maternal protection. He wasn't just the provider of food, he was also, in her eyes, a past source of pain, a potential threat near her incredibly vulnerable baby. He knew his approach had to change immediately. Instead of retreating into the house, he backed away slowly, deliberately making himself smaller, less threatening. He went only as far as the edge of the covered porch, where he stood partially sheltered, watching them. Spitfire remained tense, but her growling lessened slightly as he increased the distance. His first thought was shelter. That soggy cardboard box was pitifully inadequate against the driving rain and cold. He went into his garage, rummaging through storage bins until he found a sturdy plastic tote box, about medium size, with higher sides. He grabbed a thick old towel from the laundry room, one Karen had left behind, soft from countless washes. Returning to the porch, he approached the recycling bin area again, moving very slowly, speaking softly. "Easy now, Mama," he murmured, keeping his voice low and calm, avoiding direct eye contact. "Just want to help. That box is soaked. This might be warmer for your little one." Spitfire watched his every move, growling nervously as he neared, but she didn't charge or swipe. Perhaps his quiet tone, his slow movements, or simply her overwhelming focus on the kitten kept her rooted. David carefully placed the plastic tote on its side near the cardboard box, arranging the soft towel inside to create a makeshift nest. He then retreated back to the porch edge. He waited. Spitfire eyed the new container suspiciously, sniffed its edge, then looked back at her kitten, shivering in the damp cardboard. The wind gusted, sending another spray of cold rain under the overhang. After a moment of seeming indecision, the mother cat made her move. Gently, carefully, she nudged her kitten with her nose, then picked it up by the scruff of its neck, its tiny body dangling limply, and swiftly transferred it into the dry, towel-lined tote. She immediately settled in beside it, curling protectively around the small form, finally sheltered from the worst of the wind and rain. She shot David one wary glance, then focused entirely on licking her baby dry. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A small victory. An olive branch accepted, however tentatively. He knew better than to push his luck. He went back inside, but left the porch light on so he could monitor them from the kitchen window. He saw Spitfire rearranging the towel, ensuring the kitten was tucked securely against her belly. She looked exhausted, but resolute. Over the next few days, David adjusted the ritual. He placed the food and fresh water right beside the plastic tote shelter. He spent more time just sitting quietly on the porch steps while Spitfire ate, letting her grow accustomed to his calm, non-threatening presence at a distance. He spoke to her occasionally, soft words about the weather or compliments on her beautiful, though still very skinny, kitten. Spitfire remained wary, often pausing mid-chew to fix him with a suspicious stare, but the overt aggression subsided. The growls became less frequent, the hisses almost non-existent, replaced by a tense vigilance. She seemed to understand, perhaps, that he posed no immediate threat to her kitten. She still wouldn't let him get close, darting back into the tote if he stood up or moved too quickly, but the wall of hostility was developing small cracks. He noticed the kitten seemed lethargic. It barely moved within the tote, and its tiny cries were weak. Spitfire spent almost all her time curled around it, licking it, trying to nudge it into nursing, her own anxiety palpable. David worried. Newborn kittens were incredibly fragile. Even with a devoted mother, things could go wrong quickly, especially if the mother herself wasn't in peak condition. He knew they needed proper medical care, a checkup for both mother and baby, maybe supplemental feeding for the kitten. But how could he get them there? Spitfire would never allow him to simply pick them up. He needed her trust, her cooperation. He started bringing better food, canned kitten pâté, rich in nutrients, placing it right at the entrance of the tote. Spitfire devoured it gratefully. He spent hours just sitting near them, reading a book aloud softly, letting the sound of his voice become part of the background. Slowly, painstakingly, Spitfire began to relax marginally in his presence. She stopped flattening her ears every time he moved. Once, while he was sitting particularly still, she even emerged from the tote while he was there, stretched, and cautiously approached the food bowl just a few feet away from him. It was the kitten's continued lethargy that finally forced the issue. One morning, David saw Spitfire nudging the baby repeatedly, letting out distressed little chirps, but the kitten barely responded. Fear clenched David's own heart. He knew he had to try. He approached the tote slowly, speaking constantly in low, soothing tones. "It's okay, Mama. I think the little one needs help. We need to see a doctor. I won't hurt you. I promise. Let me help your baby." Spitfire watched him, trembling slightly, torn between fear and maternal desperation. She growled softly, a worried sound now, not an angry one. As David reached the tote, she didn't bolt. She stayed curled around her kitten, looking from it to David and back again. Taking a huge leap of faith, David slowly, carefully reached into the tote. Spitfire tensed, but didn't strike. He gently stroked her head once, then carefully scooped up the tiny, worryingly cool kitten, wrapping it in a corner of the towel. "We need to take Mama, too," he murmured. He brought over a cat carrier he'd bought weeks ago, hoping for this moment, placing it near the tote. Spitfire watched, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Then, as David held her weak kitten gently, she seemed to make a decision. Driven by the overriding need to stay with her baby, she hesitantly stepped out of the tote and, after a moment's pause, walked into the open carrier. David quickly but gently placed the kitten beside her and latched the door, his own hand shaking with adrenaline and relief. The bridge, fragile as it was, had been crossed. The visit to Dr. Evans' veterinary clinic was revealing. David explained the situation: the stray mother, the single kitten found in a box during the rain, the mother's specific long-standing aggression towards him, and his suspicion about a past incident. Dr. Evans listened patiently while examining both cats. The kitten, a little female David tentatively started calling Pip, short for Pippin as she was so small, was indeed weak. She was dehydrated, underweight, and slightly hypothermic. Dr. Evans administered subcutaneous fluids and showed David how to supplement her feeding with kitten milk replacer, KMR, using a small syringe as her suckle reflex was poor. "She's fragile," the vet cautioned, "but with supportive care and a devoted mama, she has a fighting chance." Then Dr. Evans examined the mother cat. He noted her lean condition, the torn ear, the general scars of a tough life. As he gently palpated her legs, she flinched slightly when he touched her right hip area. "Well, now," he murmured, feeling carefully. "There's some old scar tissue here, maybe some slight remodeling on the bone. Feels like she sustained an injury to this hip or leg quite some time ago. Blunt force trauma, most likely, consistent with being hit or bumped hard. It's healed, but she probably has some residual stiffness or sensitivity, especially in cold or damp weather." David felt a fresh wave of guilt wash over him. It was true. His careless moment months ago had likely caused her real pain, a lasting injury. No wonder she didn't trust him. I think I might have been the one who bumped her," David admitted quietly. "Accidentally, months ago." Dr. Evans looked at him, then at the orange cat watching them warily from the carrier where she guarded Pip. "Well, that would explain her attitude towards you specifically," he said thoughtfully. "Cats have long memories for bad experiences, but the fact that she let you bring her and the kitten in, especially with her history with you, that says a lot, Mr. Miller. And the fact you kept feeding her despite her hostility." He shook his head slightly. You both overcame quite a bit to get here." Bringing them back home felt like a new beginning. David set them up in his spare room, providing the plastic tote shelter, soft bedding, a low litter box, food, water, and the KMR for Pip. He spent hours just sitting quietly in the room with them, letting them get used to his constant, calm presence. He dutifully supplemented Pip's feedings, handling the tiny kitten gently. The mother cat, whom he now resolutely thought of as Amber, a name that suited her warm color and the spark of fire within her, watched his every move with Pip intently. She seemed to understand he was helping. She allowed him to handle the kitten without protest, sometimes even giving Pip an encouraging lick after David finished feeding her. Slowly, Amber's behavior towards David transformed. She stopped hiding when he entered the room. She started approaching him cautiously when he brought fresh food, occasionally rubbing against his legs before eating. One evening, while he was sitting on the floor reading aloud softly, she hopped onto the armchair nearby, curled up, and started purring. David felt his breath catch. It was the first time he had heard her purr. As Pip grew stronger under their combined care, Amber relaxed further. She began soliciting attention, bunting her head against David's hand, allowing him to stroke her back. She even started sleeping on the end of his bed at night, a silent acknowledgement of trust regained. The deep-seated fear was finally being overshadowed by the consistent experience of kindness and safety. News of the turnaround spread quietly. Mrs. Henderson, initially skeptical, saw David sitting on his porch with Amber lounging peacefully nearby and Pip batting at a string. She stopped to marvel. David, feeling less guarded himself these days, shared the story. The accidental bump, the months of aggression, the rainy day discovery, the kitten, the vet's confirmation of the old injury. Mrs. Henderson was visibly moved. "Oh, David," she said, her voice soft, "that poor cat. And you kept feeding her all that time, even when she scratched you?" David just shrugged, embarrassed. "And now look at them," Mrs. Henderson continued, watching Pip tumble over Amber's paws. "Who would have thought?" The story touched others who heard it, a quiet testament to patience, forgiveness, even if feline, and the healing power of persistent kindness. People saw David differently too, not just the lonely divorced man, but the quiet neighbor capable of extraordinary empathy. One evening, David sat in his armchair, reading, with Amber curled on the ottoman at his feet and Pip asleep in a fluffy bed beside her. He looked at the peaceful scene, a world away from the solitary silence that had pervaded the house just months before. He thought about Amber's fierce protection of Pip in that soggy box. Maybe it was just protecting the only thing left in its life, he mused aloud, echoing the thought shared in the prompt, finding resonance in his own post-divorce feelings of needing to protect what mattered. He felt a profound connection to this resilient orange cat who had overcome injury and fear to protect her young, and who had, against all odds, allowed him back into her world. They were two solitary beings, marked by past hurts, who had found an unlikely solace in each other. Scars remained, yes, but they were healing together. They were, in their own quiet way, soulmates.